The hydraulic excavator's arm sinks into the black water at exactly 4:37 in the morning, and the operator feels it immediately. That wrongness transmitted through steel and hydraulic fluid. The resistance that shouldn't be there 15 meters below the surface of this forgotten Florida swampland where nothing man-made should exist. Sound of diesel engines idling in humid darkness. The crew chief radios from the barge, his voice crackling through the pre-dawn fog that rises from the water like something living, something that has been waiting here since before anyone can remember. And he says the magnetometer readings are spiking again, the same impossible signatures they've been chasing for 3 weeks through this maze of stagnant channels where the GPS loses signal, and the maps from 1820 show only blank spaces marked with warnings about fever and hostile territory. The suction dredge roars to life, its intake pipe wider than a grown man's torso, and the water begins to move, thick and brown and smelling of decay that goes down centuries. Organic matter compressed under its own weight into something that isn't quite liquid and isn't quite solid. Something that holds secrets the way amber holds insects. The first indication comes when the pump pressure drops suddenly, cavitation hammering through the system as the intake encounters something that won't move, won't compress, won't surrender to the physics of industrial suction. Sound of metal grinding against metal deep underwater. The engineer kills the pumps, and the sudden silence is total, except for the drip of water from the barge's framework and the distant bellow of an alligator somewhere in the palmetto thickets that surround this operation like walls. They've been here before, encountered cypress logs from the Pleistocene, limestone formations that shouldn't exist at this depth. But this is different because the magnetometer is screaming now, reading so intense the operator thinks his equipment might be malfunctioning until the backup unit confirms it. Metallic mass at bearing 270, length approximately 60 meters, buried in sedimentation that ground-penetrating radar suggests is at least 200 years old. The site supervisor makes the call that will cost $800 million before this is finished. Brings in the specialized equipment from the Gulf, the floating cranes with capacities measured in hundreds of tons, the cofferdam cells that will transform this section of swamp into something resembling a construction site, the pumps that can move water at rates that make the first dredge look like a child's toy. They begin with the perimeter, driving sheet piling into the muck with diesel hammers that echo across the wetlands like artillery fire. Each steel section interlocking with the next to create a cellular structure that will, in theory, hold back the entire weight of the swamp while they work inside its protection. Sound of pile driver impacts, rhythmic and brutal. The vibrations travel through water and earth, and in the historical archives in Tallahassee, a researcher notices something odd about land surveys from 1863. About a channel that appears on Confederate maps but vanishes from all federal records after the war, about rumors of a payroll shipment that left Richmond in late April and never arrived at its destination, about gold that simply ceased to exist in any official documentation. The cofferdams go deeper, 20 meters, 25, until they hit the clay layer that predates European settlement, and the pumps begin their work, diesel and electric in combination, moving water at rates that create currents strong enough to sweep a man off his feet. Water that comes out black at first, then brown, then finally clear enough to see the bottom where something massive lies waiting. The shape emerges gradually, not all at once. Because that's not how archaeology works in environments like this, where every centimeter of progress requires hours of careful excavation, where the line between preservation and destruction is measured in pounds of pressure per square inch. Sound of water draining, sucking sound of exposed mud. The first thing they see is wood, oak, timber cut with tools that left marks nothing like modern saw blades, wood that should have rotted away decades ago but hasn't, preserved in the anaerobic environment of the swamp bottom where oxygen never penetrates and the normal processes of decay simply stop. The hull curves upward, clinker built in a style that went out of fashion before the Civil War even started. And someone realizes they're looking at construction techniques from the 1810s, from the era when Florida was still Spanish territory and steamships were exotic novelties that most Americans had never seen. But it's what covers the hull that makes the site supervisor call in the National Guard to secure the perimeter. Because beneath 200 years of accumulated sediment, beneath the biological film in the mineral deposits, there is gold. Not gold leaf, not gilding, but plates of solid gold, each one approximately 3 millimeters thick, riveted to the oak planking with copper fasteners that have oxidized to green, but still hold fast. 4 seconds of absolute silence, distant bullfrog calling. The metallurgical analysis will later confirm it's 22-karat gold, purity levels consistent with Confederate reserves, and the coverage is total. Every exposed surface of the hull sheathed in precious metal that would have made this vessel worth a fortune even empty, even stripped of whatever cargo it carried into this forgotten waterway and never left. The immediate question is why? Because gold plating on a wooden steamship makes no engineering sense, adds weight without adding strength, creates maintenance nightmares in saltwater environments, serves no practical purpose unless the purpose isn't practical at all, unless the purpose is to make a statement or hide something or both. The naval historians arrive by helicopter, circling twice before landing on the barge because the site is that remote, that inaccessible except by water, and they stand at the edge of the cofferdam and stare at what 2 centuries of mud have hidden, and none of them can explain it. None of them can find a precedent in any archive or museum collection. The excavation continues in layers like peeling back time itself, and at 12 meters of depth, they find the paddle wheel, massive iron and oak construction frozen in the position it held when it made its last revolution. Blades still caked with sediment that contains pollen from plant species that no longer grow in this region, climate change and development having erased them from the landscape. Sound of metal scraping against wood as debris is cleared. The boiler comes next, cast iron manufactured in Pittsburgh according to the maker's mark that's still legible despite decades underwater. Pressure rating stamped into the metal indicating this was a commercial vessel, built for cargo, not speed, designed for the shallow draft navigation required in Florida's coastal waterways during the antebellum period when the state was frontier territory and transportation infrastructure consisted of mud roads and navigable rivers. But the presence of gold transforms everything, suggests this was never a commercial operation at all, suggests purposes far removed from the mundane business of moving cotton or timber, or passengers between scattered settlements. They bring in the floating crane, a specialized unit borrowed from offshore oil operations in the Gulf of Mexico, capable of lifting 600 tons in a single controlled movement, and they begin the delicate process of rigging the wreck for recovery, sound of steel cables unspooling from massive drums. The engineering challenges are immense because they're not just lifting weight, they're lifting history, and if the hull breaks apart during the ascent, then everything inside is lost, scattered across the swamp bottom where it took 2 centuries to bury and might take 2 more to find again. The cables are positioned according to computer models that account for the vessel's estimated center of gravity, for the distribution of remaining structural integrity after 200 years of submersion, for the unknown weight of whatever cargo still lies in the hold beneath layers of silt and collapsed decking. The tension is calibrated to within 5% of maximum safe load, and the lift begins at dawn when the air is coolest and the thermal expansion of the steel cables is at its minimum. The first meter takes 4 hours because they're feeling their way, letting the wreck tell them where it wants to go, responding to every creak and groan of stressed timber with minute adjustments in cable tension and lift angle, sound of ancient wood creaking under enormous strain. At 2 meters, the paddle wheel breaks the surface, water cascading from its blades in sheets that catch the morning light and throw rainbow refractions across the cofferdam. And the gold plating is visible now, dulled by sediment but unmistakable, metal that has waited in darkness since the last year of the Civil War to return to daylight. At 4 meters, the boiler clears the waterline and the scale of the vessel becomes apparent, length over 60 meters, beam at least 12, displacement that must have exceeded 200 tons when fully loaded, and someone does the mathematics and realizes this represents more gold by weight than the entire Confederate treasury held in reserve at the war's end. More precious metal than could possibly have been spared for a single ship no matter how important its mission. The hull emerges like something from a fever dream, black mud streaming from every surface, the gold beneath showing through in patches where the sediment is thinner, or where the current of draining water has carved channels through the accumulated filth. Sound of mud sloughing off in wet masses. They've erected platforms at multiple heights inside the cofferdam, so the archaeological team can access the wreck from all angles as it rises, and cameras document everything, every rivet and plank and decorative element. because this is the kind of discovery that rewrites historical narratives and ends academic careers for anyone who gets the interpretation wrong. At 8 meters, the nameplate becomes visible. Cast bronze mounted on the bow, letters filled with verdigris but still readable when the mud is carefully cleaned away, and the name makes 3 of the historians physically step back from the edge because they recognize it from memoirs and dispatches and newspaper accounts that they'd always assumed were exaggerated or fabricated entirely. The vessel is the CSS Golden Promise, listed in Confederate naval records as lost with all hands in a storm off Cape Canaveral in April 1865. The week before Lee's surrender at Appomattox, a tragedy that barely registered in the chaos of the war's final days and was forgotten entirely in the decades that followed. But she wasn't lost at sea. She was here, deliberately scuttled in a channel that doesn't appear on any modern map, hidden in a location that would have been accessible only to someone with intimate knowledge of Florida's coastal geography. And the gold plating suddenly makes terrible sense because this wasn't a ship. It was a vault, a mobile repository for wealth that the Confederacy needed to protect from advancing Union forces. 4 seconds of absolute silence. Sound of palmetto fronds rustling in breeze. The lift continues, 12 meters, 15, and the main deck comes into view, largely intact despite the collapsed sections amidships, and there are objects visible through gaps in the planking, shapes that don't belong on a cargo vessel, rectangular and uniform in size. And the archaeological team begins shouting coordinates and references because they can see what's down there, what the Golden Promise was carrying when she made her final voyage into this swamp. At 18 meters, the crane operators pause the lift to allow the rigging to stabilize, and in that moment of stillness, the full magnitude of the discovery becomes clear, because the mud has drained away enough to reveal the hold. And the hold is filled with wooden crates, dozens of them, each one approximately 1 meter by half a meter by half a meter. Military construction with rope handles and stenciled markings that identify them as property of the Confederate States Treasury Department. The crates are stacked in rows that suggest a cargo capacity of perhaps 200 units total. And if each one contains what the markings indicate, then this represents not just gold, but the operational reserves of an entire government, the liquid assets needed to continue fighting a war that everyone knew was already lost. The question of why becomes urgent now because in April 1865 the Confederacy was collapsing, Richmond had fallen, and any rational actor would have been attempting to preserve capital for personal use or to finance escape to Europe or Mexico, not loading it onto a steamship and sending it into the Florida wilderness. The lift resumes at 800 hours, and by 1100 the Golden Promise hangs completely free of the water, suspended in the cofferdam like a specimen under examination. Mud still dripping from every surface but the essential form now revealed. A steamship from America's industrial adolescence, sheathed in gold and loaded with treasure that was deliberately hidden from history. Sound of water dripping, mechanical hum of crane hydraulics. They lower her onto a custom-built cradle, a framework of steel designed to support the hull's weight without causing structural damage, and the archaeological excavation can begin in earnest, the careful process of documenting and removing the cargo while preserving the context that gives it meaning beyond simple monetary value. The first crate is opened under controlled conditions, humidity and temperature monitored, and it contains exactly what the exterior markings promised: gold bars, each one stamped with Confederate eagles and dates from 1863 and 1864. Purity marks indicating 999 fine gold, weight approximately 20 kilograms per bar, 40 bars per crate. And the mathematics becomes staggering because 40 bars times 200 crates equals 8,000 bars, equals 160,000 kilograms, equals 160 metric tons of gold. But it's the second crate that changes everything, because it doesn't contain gold at all. It contains documents, correspondence sealed in waterproof containers made of copper and lead, letters and orders and maps that have survived 2 centuries underwater because someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure their preservation. Sound of metal seal breaking as conservators open the container. The papers are in excellent condition, ink still legible, and they tell a story that contradicts every accepted narrative about the Confederacy's final days, about what happened to the gold reserves, about who knew what and when they knew it. There are orders signed by Jefferson Davis himself, dated April 3, 1865, the day Richmond fell, directing the transfer of all remaining treasury gold to the Golden Promise and authorizing its voyage to a location specified only by coordinates that correspond to exactly where she was found. There are letters to foreign governments, to France and Britain, offering the gold as collateral for military intervention, a last desperate attempt to bring European powers into the war, even as Union armies occupied every major Confederate city. And there are other documents, ones that the historians handle with something approaching fear, because they describe plans that extend beyond the war's end, plans for a government in exile, for continued resistance through guerrilla warfare, for the preservation of slavery through any means necessary, even if that meant abandoning the pretense of nationhood entirely. 4 seconds of absolute silence, sound of paper rustling. The Golden Promise wasn't running away. She was setting up a future, establishing a cache of resources that could fund decades of terrorist operations against Reconstruction governments. Operations that history records as spontaneous violence, but that these documents reveal as coordinated and financed from the very highest levels of the defunct Confederacy. The dates on the correspondence extend into 1866 and 1867, years after Lee's surrender, suggesting that whoever scuttled this ship in this remote channel knew they might not survive to retrieve the cargo, but wanted it positioned for others to find, others who would carry on the fight through methods that the modern world would recognize as insurgency. The recovery operation continues for months, each crate cataloged and examined, and the total value of the gold alone exceeds $5 billion at current market prices. But the historical value of the documents is incalculable because they provide evidence of conspiracies that until now existed only in speculation and dismissed as paranoid fantasy. Sound of excavation continuing, water pumps running continuously. The physical recovery of the Golden Promise requires the construction of a temporary railway from the cofferdam site to the nearest road capable of supporting heavy transport, 3 kilometers of track laid through swampland at enormous expense. And the vessel makes the journey in sections after naval architects determine the hull cannot survive movement as a single unit. The gold goes to secure facilities under armed guard, and the documents go to climate-controlled archives where scholars will spend years analyzing their implications. And the Golden Promise herself will eventually reside in a custom-built museum where visitors can see the gold plating and imagine what it meant to transform a commercial steamship into a floating treasure vault worth more than some small nations. But the question that haunts everyone involved in the recovery is the simplest one, and the one with no clear answer. Who scuttled her and why did they never come back? The channel where she was found is navigable only during high water periods, accessible from the coast but hidden from casual observation. Exactly the kind of location someone would choose if they intended to return, but wanted to ensure no one else could stumble across the site accidentally. The archaeological evidence suggests the ship was deliberately sunk, ballast shifted to one side, seacocks opened, a controlled flooding that put her on the bottom gently enough to preserve the cargo intact. But there's no evidence of the crew, no bodies in the wreck or buried nearby. No indication of what happened to the people who knew the Golden Promise's final location and presumably intended to retrieve her cargo when circumstances allowed. Sound of wind across empty water, distant bird calls. The historical record offers hints, but no conclusions. References to Confederate agents operating in Florida through the 1870s. Mentions of gold shipments that never arrived and were never explained. Deaths and disappearances that might have been accidents or might have been something else entirely. The prevailing theory, though it remains unprovable, suggests that the original crew succeeded in hiding the Golden Promise but died before they could pass on her location, victims of disease or violence in an era when Florida was genuinely dangerous territory, when yellow fever killed thousands and conflicts with displaced Seminole populations were common. The people who knew the secret took it to unmarked graves, and the Golden Steamship became a ghost story. One of dozens of lost treasure tales that circulated in the post-war South. Most of them fabrications, but this one real. This one waiting beneath black water and centuries of accumulated mud for someone with modern technology and unlimited resources to find her. 4 seconds of absolute silence. Sound of insects in evening swamp. The $800 million recovery cost becomes justified not just by the monetary value of the gold, but by what the discovery represents. Proof that history is incomplete, that even major events from well-documented periods can hide secrets that alter our understanding when they finally emerge. The Golden Promise forces a reconsideration of the Civil War's aftermath, of how easily violent extremism can be financed and sustained, of how long the consequences of that conflict continue to shape American society in ways both obvious and hidden. The facility where the gold now resides is located in an undisclosed location. Security measures that would satisfy a military installation, protecting assets that technically belong to the federal government, as salvage from navigable waters, but remain subject to complex legal challenges from descendants of Confederate Treasury officials and from the state of Florida itself. The documents have already begun reshaping historical scholarship, their contents leading to the identification of previously unknown participants in post-war violence, to the tracing of money flows that funded terror campaigns presented in history books as spontaneous outbursts rather than coordinated operations. And somewhere in the archives, sealed under judicial order until various interested parties can agree on how to proceed, are letters that name specific families, specific individuals who profited from the Golden Promise's intended mission, even though they never recovered the gold itself, who built fortunes and reputations on wealth that can now be traced directly to the Confederate Treasury and the vessel that tried to preserve it beyond the war's end. The swamp has returned to its normal state. The cofferdam removed, the channel refilled with water and sediment, and within a generation no physical evidence will remain that this location ever held anything unusual. Sound of returning wildlife, frogs and insects and birds reclaiming the space. But the memory persists, and the implications spread through academic communities and historical societies, through books and documentaries and university courses that now must account for what the Golden Promise revealed. The recovery stands as a testament to modern engineering's capability to reclaim the past from even the most hostile environments, to apply industrial-scale resources to the delicate work of archaeological investigation, to balance the competing demands of preservation and revelation. The floating cranes and diesel pumps and sheet pile cofferdams represent humanity's ongoing dialogue with history, our insistence on knowing what happened even when time and nature conspire to keep secrets buried in mud and darkness. Our need to understand not just the past, but how that past continues to shape the present in ways we're only beginning to recognize. And our determination to bring into daylight even those things that others went to extraordinary lengths to hide forever in the black water of a forgotten Florida swamp, where maps show only emptiness and warnings about territory that resists human understanding.